Let me see, Dr. Lewis and Mr. Fanning, let me see if I can sort of lay out what I think I understand about this and get you to correct me or supplement it where you will. We are, when it comes to national security perspective, we are up against nation states that use this technology for information warfare, to destabilize our institutions like our elections, to steal information like they did in the DNC server hack, release emails in the midst of an election through WikiLeaks. We, on the other hand, are an open society, and most of the activity we're talking about occurs not in the government's hands, but in the private sector's hands. Let me try to make some sense of this. It seems to me that we need an all-of-government effort, just like our adversaries have, to deal with this threat. The challenge we have, and maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Fanning, is that, as I said, so much of the infrastructure is in the private sector's hands. You have a responsibility to the people you work with and for to do whatever it takes to protect the Southern companies' ability to operate and provide electricity and other services to your customers. How comfortable are you sharing all that information with the federal government, knowing that the federal government is subject to things like the Freedom of Information Act, and there are other ways for people to gain access to sensitive information? How comfortable are you sharing that information so that everybody can kind of know what everybody else knows, among the good guys, I should say?
Yes, sir, 100%. We take it very seriously. We understand how important our infrastructure is, the electricity infrastructure. I'm speaking not only for Southern Company, but also for our industry. 87% of electricity infrastructure is owned by private industry. The other thing that we take seriously is this notion of what do we do in the event of an existential threat. That's why it is so important to create this classic public-private partnership. The FAST Act was a good piece of legislation. But in the event a problem occurs, how does government know what to do? They can only do that in partnership with us. And I would give, you say lousy. In the existential threat, that is where it is dire consequence to American way of life, I would argue that Secretary Rick Perry has given this a high priority in doing the right things inside DOE. I would argue that Kirstjen Nielsen is doing a great job with DHS under Secretary Krebs, putting together the right infrastructure. What I see out of this cabinet anyway is an effort for this administration to mirror, in fact, what we are doing in private industry so that we have the most effective two-way relationship. It is our responsibility as patriots, as Americans, to share this information transparently and as real time as possible.
More than a decade ago, the United States and the Department of Defense began a major effort to improve U.S. capabilities to attribute the source of an attack. This uses all source intelligence, so it's traditional signals intelligence, cyber intelligence, human intelligence, satellite intelligence, put them all together, and in the majority of cases, not all, and not immediately, but in the majority of cases, the U.S. can identify the source. This is a problem sometimes with working with allies. I would note that some private sector companies are now developing capabilities that are almost as good. So over time, attribution will be less of a problem. The dilemma we have is that when you look at the Chinese and when you look at the Russians, and even when you look at the Iranians, they don't care if they get caught. We catch them and they don't care. So I'm not so much worried about attribution as how we come up with this whole of government defense and some new way to deter opponents.
Dr. Lewis, can you explain the relationship between financially motivated Russian cybercrime and state interests in undermining American public trust? How did the latter sanction the former, and how much leash do the financially motivated cybercriminals have from Russia?
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. The interrelationship between criminal gangs and the Russian government, and particularly the Kremlin, is so deep and so complicated that I think you could really describe it as seamless. And so when you look at some of the oligarchs, they have criminal backgrounds. When you look at Vladimir Putin, he has relations with most of the leading crime families in Russia, directive relationships. We heard earlier from the Justice Department representative about indictments and extradition. One of the Russian cybercriminals who was extradited had as an uncle the chairman at that time of Russia's equivalent of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So the connections are incredibly deep. And what's interesting is that so far, the Kremlin seems to be directing these people. They can call on them to undertake action. They can use them as tools, as proxies. And they also use them to make money. So it's a deep relationship that disentangling will be very, very difficult for the U.S.
So I think what you said there is incredibly important, because my question was really about cyber criminals and the state, and you added in the oligarchs and these big 20 sectors. We got a whole bunch of U.S. pension funds and mutual funds and individual investors that are involved in investing in these oligarch sectors. Shouldn't this institution in the executive branch be talking to the American people and be talking to institutions like CalPERS and saying, hey, you're involved with some people who are really, really shady actors? Well, before we get to debate about specific sanctions, new sanctions, we need lots more. But the boomerang effects of some of these, shouldn't we be having American companies and American patriots be asking why they're investing in these oligarchs?
Senator, I would agree that if you were an American or an American company, you would want to be very cautious about investing in a Russian entity, because there is no rule of law in Russia. And so we've seen cases with Western companies and others where one day you're the owner and the next day you're dispossessed. So caution is the watchword for this.
Thank you. Mr. Fanning, I don't know if you know this, but you have a lot of people around town that are big fans of yours, because we don't think there are a whole bunch of people who are good at communicating about the long-term risks we face in cyber. And this isn't your day job. Obviously, protecting critical infrastructure is part of your day job, but you're also just a really good communicator about this. So if you were at the Atlanta Rotary tomorrow and trying to explain what's sort of a likely attack on the American critical infrastructure that the American people should expect over the next 5 to 10 years, and then what's an extreme attack going to look like?
Here's the thing. I think, it's funny. Nuclear power and all that gets a lot of the headlines. The real crown jewels in the electric system really deals with the electricity management infrastructure. We run the nervous system for managing electricity in the Southeast. We do a defense in-depth approach. If they could ever get into our ability to manage electron flows across this part of the United States, and really, in fact, impacting everything we border, would be really catastrophic. I go through an example of what we do. That is, we have a highly protected, separated group that does energy management. We have an undisclosed location in a different part of the United States that manage it in milliseconds. So complete millisecond backup. Thirdly, we have something called spare tire. It's just like that ugly tire in your car. It could get you from the blowout to a gas station. Couldn't run a power market off of it, but it will enable us with voltage swings and some rolling brownouts or whatever, we could get by until we could fix the problem. Finally, the most compelling answer in terms of our ability to be resilient is to separate from the digital age. Now, the people that came before me ran an electric system in the 1950s that didn't depend upon the internet or anything else. In the Naval Academy, they are now teaching midshipmen to use sextants. There is an analog in our sector where we want to teach people how to run the electric system not depending upon the digital age, and we are doing that. It's called the MacGyver Project. And we're doing that across the industry. It involves a whole new set of training where we're going to be able to do it. There are Achilles heels to that, namely communications. I can send somebody to a substation, and I can run that substation manually, but I got to be able to talk to them.
Dr. Lewis.
I teach at the Naval Academy.
Yes, sir.
They are moving people back to sextants. Same's true at Pensacola at the Fight School. Because you can no longer rely on our digital infrastructure. You can use it, but you've got to be ready for when it goes down. But I think that the goal here is to not to build the fallbacks, not to prepare, but to find ways to make sure we can get the benefit and can continue to use this. So Navy's doing a good job, so are the other services, but we want to think about how we can use information technology to defeat our opponents.
In some of your written testimonies, there was a comment on the relative threat from nation-state actors versus non-state jihadi actors. Around here, we often use the shorthand that we got 4 big nation-state actors. Yep. Russia's the current fight, but we all know this is proxy war for China, going to be a lot more effective at this in the long term. Iran and North Korea. Inside the jihadi space, though, how small could a terror cell be and be able to potentially penetrate your network? What's the smallest entity that you worry about?
So here's one of the things I disagree a wee bit with Jim, and Jim has been terrific. I think this attribution issue is much more complex, and I think it's very serious. Imagine, here again, my metaphor would be James Bond movies, the emergence of Spectre. These are people that know statecraft, and they'll leave their jobs in Moscow or wherever they are, or Beijing, or Iran, or North Korea, and they will collaborate for criminal purposes or other nefarious purposes. I think this issue is getting more serious, and attribution is getting more complex. One of the things I absolutely agree with Dr. Lewis is this idea of mutually assured destruction is a very compelling defense dogma. But your worst nightmare are people that have nothing to lose. That's what we've got to worry about.
So give me a head count. What number of programmers does some group need to be before you're thinking they're sufficiently of scale that they could cause you a problem?
Right now, I'd say you need 20 to 30 people. You need 3 to 6 months. And you need somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. And that's based on experience. If you ever get a chance, go to Israel. Israel is attacked by Iran and Hezbollah every week in efforts to use cyber tools to disrupt their critical infrastructure. So far, they've been able to beat them off. But if I was worried about a non-state actor, I would worry about Hezbollah first.
I want the technology to survive. I mean, who wants to go back to analog? Who wants to, like Dr. Lewis, the Navy and every other military organization use GPS to navigate and send missiles and bombs, right? Yeah. Well, I just imagine how many civilians' deaths would be out there if we lost that capability. So if you're trying to disable the Air Force, or the Navy go after the GPS system, and we're all over trying to have backups. And you're right, Mr. Fanning, there are some people who death is first prize. Mutual assured destruction works when the other side is worried about losing something. Here's the good news. Most of the people we've talked about are worried about losing something. Mutual assured destruction will work against Iran. It will work against Russia. It will work against China. It will work against North Korea. As to the terrorists, it's a different deal. They don't mind dying. They just want to take you with them. Okay, so I just want the committee to understand that what we're doing is not working. It doesn't do us any good to blame Obama. It doesn't do us any good to blame Trump, because what we're doing is just not working. Now, Mr. Fanning, you have nuclear reactors, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have armed guards around those reactors?
You bet.
Is that required by law?
Yep.
Do you have a requirement when you build a nuclear reactor to think about natural disasters that could compromise that reactor?
Yes.
So if you build in a certain part of the country, you got to tell the people in charge that regulate you, you know, I've accounted for earthquakes and other natural disasters. Is that correct?
And a resilience plan.
Right.
Yep.
Is there such a thing required of cyber threats? When you build a reactor, do you have to prove to people this thing is immune from cyber threats?
There are cyber standards. We're the only industry in America that has cyber standards.
Does it
And
come
there-
from the government?
I'm sorry?
Do they come from the government?
Yes, through NERC.
Okay. So you do actually have some cyber standards.
Yes, but
But you're the only industry in America that has those.
yes, that's right. And they're not enough. Okay? It's a great effort. We're proud of that. It's always not enough. And that's one of the worries I have.
So
You-
telecom doesn't have that legal requirement.
Nope, not to my knowledge.
Financial sectors do not have that requirement.
Except, I will say, no, but I will say, working with the
No, they're
tri-sector,
trying, but I'm just saying,
they're very
you sell a
diligent.
financial product, there's all kind of compliance.
Yes,
You open up a bank, there's all kind of people looking at how you open up a bank.
yeah,
If you want to build a telephone company or a telecom company, you have to go get permission and do a bunch of stuff.
yes.
But no requirements about how you protect this stuff cyber-wise from the government.
To my knowledge, we're the only industry that has cyber standards. I will say,
Should we
Senator.
have cyber
Hang on, Senator, I will say that particularly what I know about the financial sector, they do a darn good job of their
I
own
got you.
self-policing.
I got you, but we don't let them self-police a bank. My point is, I don't believe the government can regulate this. I think you need a partnership. I think we need to reward you. Are there any incentives in American law that reward you for engaging in best business practices when it comes to cybersecurity?
Ultimately, the stock market will, but that's it.
How
Not
about
in
how about
a,
an
not in the
immunity?
sense you're
How about
talking
immunity
about.
from lawsuits? If you'll
Yeah,
do
right.
what's best in your industry, we will protect you from being sued.
Yes, sir, I think that's a great
How
idea.
about some carrots on the table? Because I don't think DHS can regulate this. You know more about your area than DHS could ever hope to know. But Senator Whitehouse and he came up, I support the idea of called Fort Cyber. That if your industry, whether it be telecom, financial services, or electricity, that if you will build a state-of-the-art facilities, invest the money, and get audited to make sure you're not lying to us, then we will give you incentives from legal protections and otherwise to make it worth your while. Do you think that's what's missing today?
It would certainly be helpful. It'd be great.
Would it be a game changer?
A game changer. In my industry, Senator, I think a lot of people are doing a lot
Would
already.
it help you to do it quicker if you had
Yes.
a reward at the end of the tunnel?
Yes.